Hey everybody, I'm Esti, and today I'm going to teach you how to easily and quickly learn how to shoot in full manual mode, also known as manual exposure. Watch until the end because I will give you a tip to quickly master manual exposure. A lot of people dread shooting in full manual mode because it seems very complicated at first. It's like math. How do I figure out all these settings? But I assure you, it's not that difficult. Why, oh why would I ever shoot in full manual mode when there's the auto mode? Well, because the manual mode gives you full creative control over the image, and even if you're not going to shoot in full manual mode all the time, it is something that you should definitely learn and master in order to grow as a photographer. As you may already know, there are 3 settings that control exposure, and those are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Changing either one of them will also change your exposure. 2 of them, shutter speed and aperture, will also control something other than exposure. Shutter speed will either freeze your frame or introduce motion blur. And aperture will determine your depth of field, which means how blurry will your background be and how much of the photo will be in focus. The larger the opening on your lens will give you more blur, and the smaller the opening on your lens will give you less blur, and more of your photo will be in focus. So how do you figure these settings out? The easiest way is to start with a vision of your photo. What are you trying to achieve? That's going to be your first setting. So if you're trying to freeze the frame, you will have to have very fast shutter speed. Or if you want a lot of background blur, you will have to shoot wide open or close to being wide open. So basically, ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve? That will eliminate the first setting. So let's say you're taking a portrait outside and it's very bright outside. So you want to blur that background because it's busy. So you have a f1.8 lens. Set your aperture to 1.8. Let's assume that you want that. That eliminates the first setting. Then, because it's very bright outside, you will keep your ISO as low as possible. So let's say ISO 100. Then all you do is control your exposure with the shutter speed. Turn it up to lower exposure and you turn it down to increase exposure. Or let's say you're shooting fast moving subjects. So let's say a race car, or someone's riding a bike, or someone's running. That means your first setting, try to imagine it, your first setting will be shutter speed. So you will set your shutter speed high enough to freeze the frame. There will be a difference between a person running or riding a bike very fast or a race car going by. Let's say a person's running. You determine that your shutter speed is okay at 1/800th of a second. Then the next one is you determine whether you need that background blur or not. Let's say in this case, the background is busy and you want to blur that out a little bit. So you keep your aperture wide open. Then you simply use ISO to control the exposure. You turn it down to lower exposure and you turn it up to increase exposure. It's as simple as that. So basically, your first setting will always be the creative one. What are you trying to achieve? Then you eliminate that one and you use the other 2 to set exposure properly. Let me give you another example. Let's say you're outside and you're taking a picture of your kid and it's very bright and you have a 1.4 lens, which means that your aperture can go very wide. It'll give you nice background blur. So now you put your aperture at 1.4 and you're wide open and that blurry background is beautiful. Now what you do is keep your ISO very low because it's bright outside. So let's say you take ISO and you turn it down to 100, turn the shutter speed up. You get to 1/4000, which let's say is your maximum, but your photo is still overexposed. Now you have to make a decision. Well, I can't have all that background blur because my photo is overexposed. So what do? I stop down. So you have your shutter speed at 4000, you have your ISO at 100, and now basically you're controlling exposure with your aperture. So in most cases, you will actually use only one setting to control your exposure when you already picked the other two. And also I wanted to tell you about my course. If you're looking to become a professional photographer, you should learn how to edit and you should learn lighting as well. So I have this course on Patreon. Please check it out and subscribe if you want to go from beginner to pro very quickly. Or if you don't want to learn editing, but you want to go from something like this to something like this, I got Lightroom presets for your photos and LUTs for your videos. Both links are in the description. So let's recap. You have 3 settings that control your exposure: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Always think, what am I trying to achieve? And adjust your first setting according to that. Do I have to freeze the frame? Or do I want background blur? What is more important? Then adjust that setting and then move to the next one. Then think the same. What am I trying to achieve here? And how do I do it? And then with the third setting, you simply control your exposure. But what is good exposure? You have a meter on your screen that you will take a look. You won't just look at the image, you will also look at this meter. And I think a good way to start is to keep your exposure at 0. Then later, as you practice, you can decide whether something's a little bit overexposed because you have the sky in your photo and maybe the highlights are overexposed, so you underexpose it a little bit. Or if you want to overexpose it a little bit because the shadows are too dark. But keep practicing and that will come to you. And that's the tip that I wanted to give you. When I got my first proper camera, which was about 6 years ago, I got into photography and I got my first proper camera. And what I did right away was put it to full manual, so manual mode, and ISO in manual. And I shot for about a year and a half in full manual. At first, yes, it was a little bit, oh, what do I do here and what do I do there? But as you're practicing, practice, and soon enough, this will be really easy for you. So go ahead right now, put your camera in manual mode and ISO in manual as well. Do it for 3 months. And I promise you that you will learn this and master it. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the next one.